Hey, what's up everybody? This is Superberg501 and today I want to go over some new news for Outriders that pretty much confirms that they will be working on new content for the game. Now, before we get into the video, only 6% of people that watch my videos are subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with all of my videos. Now, if you followed Outriders before it was released and read a bunch of the interviews that some of the developers gave, there was never additional content for the game fully planned out. And the main sentiment that they gave through most of the interviews whenever DLCs or additional content was mentioned was that they would wait and see to see what the players want and to essentially see if the game was successful and if they would actually be able to make additional content for the game. And what I'm talking about in this video that has pretty much confirmed that they are making additional content for the game is that the Outriders Twitter page did a bunch of posts going over how many unique players they've had, a bunch of different stats in the game like how much of a specific resource has been gathered, how many of a specific enemy have been killed, stuff like that. And then they ended it with this message: thank you to all the players on all platforms. We are continuing to listen carefully and want to ensure you all that we are committed to improving and enhancing your experiences throughout the coming weeks and months. We are also looking forward to expanding Outriders in the future, which pretty much all but confirms that they are working on additional content for the game. And all things considered, this game does seem to have sold pretty well. It had over 100,000 concurrent players on Steam at one point. It was on the top of Steam for quite a while. It seems to have sold pretty decent on consoles as well. So it would make complete sense for them to make additional content for the game, even though the game has lost a lot of its players and is kind of seen in a more negative light with a lot of the bugs. But I think that any additional content that they release as DLCs or expansions will probably do pretty well and bring a lot of people back to the game. And realistically, in this day and age of gaming, I don't think that many games can keep a lot of players that don't plan additional content or have constant updates, aside from stuff that are fully PvP based games like League or Overwatch, or something that's incredibly massive like Skyrim or the Witcher series. And I don't think Outriders launched with enough content to keep players playing 6 months down the road or a year down the road, just because realistically, it wasn't that big of a studio making this game, and they didn't have the means to make a game that expansive that's going to keep players for that long. And I did want to go over some possible content additions that I think would be the best additions possible for Outriders, and I might do another video going more into detail on these, but I just wanted to mention a few that I think would be really good for the game and to keep people playing for a longer period of time and keep people more happy with the game in general. And the first thing is something that's been mentioned by a lot of people even before the game was released, and that's a horde mode, and something that's probably one of the easiest things to add in the game that would give the game the biggest boost, because you could have infinite waves, you could have all the different enemy types, you could have all the different bosses randomly show up. The longer you survive, the more rewards you get. It could be much better for farming the items you want. It could be somewhat randomized or fully randomized to what enemies you're going to be facing in that wave to make it much more interesting than just facing these same exact enemies at the same exact spots. And realistically, you could just reuse every asset already in the game and just put it into this horde mode system. And I would say most people would like it because the actual combat of Outriders is pretty much a thing that's the most liked about the game. And the next thing would be to expand the expedition system and essentially turn it into something like Diablo rifts. So first you have the normal rifts, then you have the timed rifts that are still in the same system but work a little bit differently. They're timed, there's leaderboards for them, they can give different rewards. And expanding the expedition system, you would already have pretty much half of that if they just tweaked it a bit with how the expeditions currently work. They're all timed, so you could add leaderboards, you could have different specific rewards for those. You could add some amount of randomization to even all of the maps that they just currently have, because probably half or more of the current expeditions aren't farmed by people. There's only a handful of expeditions that are usually farmed by most of the people that are caring about getting loot as quick as you can. And then you could add a system like normal Diablo rifts that are essentially just about completing whatever objectives they have. You could still reuse all the maps, you could add additional maps, you could add randomization, you could add different bosses in there, and it would be much more suited to allowing for different builds instead of just the highest DPS possible, which is one of the biggest issues with the endgame in Outriders, in my opinion, is that you can't make any tank builds, you can't make any support builds, you can't make any more unique builds, because you just have to worry about putting out as much DPS as you possibly can, or you're going to miss the gold time and get massively reduced amounts of loot. So adding a system that's very similar to the Diablo Rift systems would be one of the best additions you could possibly make to the game. We already know from Diablo that this system is liked by a lot of people that are going to be playing looter shooter style of games, and by other ARPGs that have similar systems. And the last thing that I think would be a very good addition to the game that wouldn't be as hard to implement would be a boss rush or boss focused endgame system, where it's focused on you fighting all the different bosses throughout the game while still getting the highest of endgame loot. You could make the bosses harder, possibly add different effects to those boss fights, put them in different arenas, give them different modes, add additional bosses to this anytime you want. And in that system, you could have also a more fast-paced boss rush version of it, to where it's about killing as many of the bosses as you can as quickly as you can. You could have multiple bosses in a fight at the same time for harder versions, and this would utilize all the boss fights that after the main campaign pretty much are completely useless because people are on expeditions getting better gear. You could utilize just all of the boss fights throughout the game and give a game mode for people to specifically focus on that, make specific builds for that, and be able to gear up just through that if that's something players want to do. Because I think two of the best moments in Outriders were the two big animal fights. So the first one was the big lava spider that seemed like it had a lot more work put into it than most of the other boss fights in the game. It had multiple phases. It felt like a true boss fight. It felt like after that boss fight, pretty much every other boss fight in the game was a letdown if you were comparing it to that. Then the second beast was the massive beast in the forest that was the boss at the end of a platform that you just shot its massive body. Then you went to phase 2, which took you into a different area where it was over top of you and you were shooting its stomach. Both those fights I think were miles ahead any of the other boss fights. Even most of the expedition boss fights were kind of just a slightly different model with very similar effects to the normal enemies that didn't really feel like a boss fight. It just felt like a stronger elite that you've been facing the entire time. So I think having some type of boss rush system, boss focused endgame system, to where you can get all the loot you want by just fighting all of these different bosses, which like I said will allow you to create completely unique builds just for this and do those really cool boss fights that are pretty much not useful to do after the main campaign. So that's pretty much all I want to go over for this video. I do hope that they are creating new content for Outriders and that it will be coming sometime in the next couple months, because currently I think most people are probably at the end of playing Outriders. I know a lot of other YouTubers are kind of getting to the end of covering it just because there's not anything else to do. There's going to be new games coming out that kind of fill that RPG slot that will take over for Outriders, and without new content coming sometime soon, the game will probably just end up having a small player base that's going to be hard to regain once a bunch of other games come out. So subscribe if you want to see more Outriders or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about additional content for Outriders. What are some cool additional content ideas you would like to see in Outriders? And thanks for watching.